When you get clear about your interests, you will attract both resistance and results. So you need to know this, that when you lack clear plans for how you will spend your time, everybody else will be able to take advantage of that lack of clarity. And they're going to be able to insert their own plans into your life. And it isn't long before something that has been asked of us becomes an ongoing expectation for how we show up in that relationship, or becomes an ongoing expectation that others have of us that we never quite take the time to evaluate, because if it doesn't align with our values, vision, or priorities, then we very likely have no business putting our hands on it. Welcome back to the Take Care and Live podcast, everybody. I'm your host, Dr. Stephen. You know, when you get clear about your interests, you will attract both resistance and results. I'll say that again. When you get clear about your interests, you will attract both resistance and results. In this episode, we're going to continue our series on interest versus enhancements, but we're going to focus on the risks associated with taking on other people's interests as your own. When other people's interests, that are driven, of course, by their expectations, make an attempt to rule your priorities, we're going to learn very specifically how being clear about our interests should not be left up to chance, but instead how we should be taking and making a focused effort to move from passive curiosity to directed engagement if we want to make that area of interest become an enhancement. We're also going to explore how to build resilience when focusing on a few priorities that are aligned to your values and expectations, disrupt other people's expectations for you, and how you can accept the resistance or the distancing and even the need to exit a particular role or relationship or environment that may result. Because when you are clear about how you will be using your time, your cognitive energy, and your tangible resources, it will expose where other people's unsolicited demands on you may be attempting to thwart your development. So you need to know this, that when you lack clear plans for how you will spend your time, everybody else will be able to take advantage of that lack of clarity. And they're going to be able to insert their own plans into your life. And this is more common than we would like to think, because life gets busy and we quickly adjust to habits and patterns because by design, we crave structure at some level, no question. And it isn't long before something that has been asked of us becomes something that we make an ongoing expectation for how we show up in that relationship, or becomes an ongoing expectation that others have of us that we never quite take the time to evaluate, to assess whether it matches or aligns with our values, our vision, or our priorities. Because if it doesn't align with our values, vision, or priorities, then we very likely have no business putting our hands on it. So let's say, for example, a friend or neighbor asks you to pick up their child from school and bring them home because for some reason they have to work late. And since both of your children go to the same school, it's not a difficult request for you to honor. But suddenly the request from that individual becomes more frequent because they have to work late more often. And this occurrence, at first, you grant it, and it seems inconsequential. But over time, it's actually costing you. And without even realizing it, you are underestimating the time it takes for you to actually implement the steps to honor their request, and don't recognize the toll it's taking on your own life. You're dropping the child off to their home before getting to yours. The additional travel time, your management of errands that you had planned to handle directly after picking your child up from school now has been infiltrated by the need to drop the child off at their home or wherever the requested location is before you can run your errand to going to the grocery store or stopping by in-laws to check up on them before you go home. Not to mention the factors outside of your control, like traffic, changes in weather that affect your commute, or other unexpected delays. Now, this may very well be an added cost that you have no problem with. You may be perfectly fine with that. This act of service may be of no heavy lift for you, for that friend or that neighbor. It might be a tremendously meaningful action for you, an important part of being community, and that's fine. However, here's the larger question. Have you examined the cost of that request and its ripple effect on the areas of your life and relationships? Or have you allowed yourself to function on autopilot? Because you and I need to be clear that some interests are not our own. Some interests are not your own. Some interests we have no business entertaining. And in fact, some interests, when they're not interrogated, they're designed to pull us away from what we're called to invest our time, our cognitive capacity, and our tangible resources into building, renewing, or enhancing. The common challenge that so many of us face today is the culture and people trap of curiosity. Interests are subtle because, as we learned in the prior episodes, at the passive level, at the initial interest level, it is easy for the environment to dictate to you how you engage, what you consume. When you're at the passive level of engagement, when you're at that passive curiosity level, you are simply taking in information and allowing the environment to tell you what's important. The constant attempt to pull us away and to get our attention, to have things just simply catch our interests, is always at work. It's always extending its energy and getting us to move in a direction that does not actually facilitate and support the areas where we're looking to grow. Curiosity towards any interest has to be aggressively directed and redirected. I'll say that again for you. Curiosity towards any interest has to be aggressively directed and redirected. Otherwise, it becomes prey to misuse because it keeps us moving in a direction where we do not authentically have a personal invested interest in seeing it develop into something that adds significant value. So, for example, you could spend your time browsing job boards during lunch. That's an interest because you may be interested in looking at a job or seeing what's out there. But updating your resume and networking strategically in your field is actually the enhancement. That's the opportunity for growth. That's the opportunity to practice and put something into motion and gain traction. Being in a group chat, right, for social reasons, because that social circle is one you're accustomed to and familiar with. Well, that's an interest. But building a circle that reflects what you're becoming and not what you've been and what you've been used to being, that's an enhancement. That's enlarging your relationship borders. Let's say you sign up for an online course, but you never finish it. Well, it stayed at the interest level. But when you choose a program that teaches you what you need to learn in a particular field or a particular subject of study and completing it fully, that's purposeful. That's the enhancement. I'm going to take a moment to share with you what I've developed. It's called the Cognitive Capital Ladder, and it's based on the 4 areas that lead you towards the final stage, the enhancement stage. Let's take a look at it for a moment. Starting at the passive level, or you can describe it as the passive curiosity level, and moving upward to the enhancement level. We're going to go through each of these elements in upcoming episodes. But the key takeaway in today's episode, in the latter that I want you to pay attention to, is that it's progressive. It moves from bottom up. At the bottom level, it's passive. It's where the environment has the most power over you. You're taking in information and allowing what you receive to be dictated to you, but you're not leveraging it in any particular way to move towards making it a useful resource for yourself. You notice in the visual I'm sharing with you right now that the passive curiosity level and the level of enhancement both can loom large. Both of them loom large, but for different reasons. The passive level is always coming at us. Social media, other people's asks of us, subtle requests that seem nice, but then become a constant ongoing request that we end up ingraining into our practice and into our day. The obligations of other people that are thrust upon us, maybe because someone else isn't pulling their weight or doing what's required of them at work, or in the relationship, people are not sharing the load and challenges of responsibility, or the expectations of making your household or a particular project or initiative be effective as it could if all hands were on deck. That's what happens at the passive level. You begin to be subjected to the environment. The passive level is the easiest for the brain to access because it doesn't require much movement. You are not pushing your prefrontal cortex to develop what's in front of you into something that's meaningful that you can put to use for yourself in a very specific, targeted way. Enhancements, however, can be just as big because as you move through the cognitive capital ladder, you are exploring the topic or the experience. You're creating opportunities for you to imagine what it would look like if you put it to practice. And then as you put it to practice, that directed engagement, you are applying it in your context, in your life, in your relationship, so that it can become something that enhances the quality of your life or work or execution of a project or your skill that you're trying to refine. Here's a leadership example. As a principal of one of my schools, it was clear that I was, in my sense and from my perspective, I was there to lead. I was on assignment to lead a particular elementary school, and I was hired for that job. It was the largest elementary school in the district, the most diverse, the most economically and culturally diverse. It was also known as the most demanding elementary school of all of the schools in the district. In fact, it had a decades-long history of being one of the more challenging environments to work because of all of the exciting but pretty challenging dynamics, not just personalities, but needs. And along with that, expected outcomes to see folks be successful, particularly our young people, our children, our students. And as principal, I was happy to experience some significant success early on. I was able to also experience a significant amount of challenge, which comes naturally with the position. It comes with the job. But those early experiences, those early successes actually drew the attention of others, particularly the school board and my supervisor, who began to float the idea of me moving towards the middle school and even the high school to bring some of what I had brought to this elementary school into the practices of those schools. Now, I was clear that I was in that district to lead that elementary school. I was there to lead that elementary school. And when approached with these ideas, I communicated very clearly that I believed my commitment was to this elementary school and that my plan was to remain there. Now, historically, you can be in a number of districts, you could be moved to another school based on need. I had come into this position, however, personally, with a very clear sense around my objectives. And in me communicating that, I understood that there were risks. I knew that there was this past practice of moving principals based on district need, but I was also clear that my vision, my mission in serving this particular school was paramount. And I had no plans or no desire to move to another building. In fact, I was so clear about this that I had already prepared in my mind the possibility of what them moving me to another place would actually need to result in my follow up actions. I was clear that I would simply have to make the necessary decision to leave the position because I knew that what I was called to do at that school was important. That clarity, when you walk into spaces with that level of clarity, when you walk into an environment or to a role with that level of clarity, it is naturally going to create frustration for some people. They're going to celebrate your wins, but they will also be frustrated with some of the ways you may not adjust to some of their expectations. Over time, even in the midst of those wins and the challenges which come with any line of work that you value and that's worth doing, there began to be a mismatch between what they saw as the possibilities for me and what I saw as an enhancement for myself. I had already spent a significant portion of my career at the secondary level. And in this elementary environment, which was new for me, to some degree, having served in another institution, helping to support them rebuild their school. I believe, though, that the context that I was in and the needs of the school, I was the right fit to help them get to the next level. And quite frankly, I did. But as my work began to move from simply just having this role of principal in the school to making my contributions one that enhanced that environment and enhanced my own life and experience in the field of education, it also began to generate resistance. In my final year, to be quite frank, in my final year, I experienced some of the greatest levels of success as well as some of the most intense levels of professional mishandling. Uh, at the same time, it, I was placed and given the opportunity to showcase what made our school great. At the same time, while experiencing this level of resistance, our school was also receiving some of the greatest and most positive press and recognition that we had ever experienced in my tenure there. That included the success of our Dads in Schools program, where fathers and father figures were able to come in and volunteer and serve at the school during the school day. The recognition of our school by the governor for our model pre-K program, which I helped to launch at our school in partnership with other leaders at the district. The securing of a science, engineering, and mathematics grant that actually doubled in size based on the needs I expressed and the ways in which I committed that we would use those resources to benefit our community. And beyond that, our school had been targeted for a group of students who were persistently performing below grade level in mathematics. And by the end of the second year of our implementation of processes and strategies to support that subgroup of students, those students had exceeded academic performance of the general population in the upcoming state exam. So I was clear about my role. I was clear about the expectations. I was clear about my interests. And the clarity around my interests garnished both resistance, but it also garnished the results that we needed. So, what does this teach us about interests? There are three things you should know: that people will always have interests for you, people will always have agendas that they prefer you make a priority. And at the same time, there will be interests that you will require of yourself to make a priority so that it can become an enhancement. You are responsible for setting the stage and the focus on what you will transform from an interest to an enhancement, despite what other people's preferences are for you. And in the process of that, you will attract both resistance and results. There is this tension that you are going to have to become comfortable with as you focus on making and engaging that risk point of moving from passive curiosity to directed engagement so that what you are doing becomes an enhancement in your life, in your work, and in the lives of other people. Because when you are clear about the direction you're headed, resistance often follows. There's a powerful example in scripture that I always go back to in the book of Nehemiah. In Nehemiah 1, Nehemiah feels convicted to rebuild the wall, to protect the city of his people. He is emotionally distraught about seeing his homeland in shambles. And he senses this call to rebuild the wall. And so he is supported by individuals who he works for in making this trip and committing some time to this effort. But by chapter 4, the work is halfway done. He is on his way of achieving his interests, of making it the enhancement he's desiring it to be. And by that time, the resentment towards him has already begun. Scripture even says, "So we rebuilt the wall until the entire wall was joined up to half its height, for the people had the will to keep working." When Sanballat, Tobiah, and the Arab Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the repairs to the wall of Jerusalem were progressing and that the gaps were being closed, they became furious. So, in the midst of Nehemiah rebuilding the wall, engaging with clear focus and determination around his interests, and the witnessing of him getting it done, it began to attract resistance. By the time we get to chapter 6 of this narrative, the resentment turns into a plot to pull Nehemiah away from his work entirely, possibly to kill him, because they're seeing that the success of the project is moving too quickly and he's actually getting the results he intended. They're attempting to distract him with repeated invitations to meet. But his response is brilliant and simple. He tells them, "I'm engaged in this great work. I cannot come. I'm engaged in this great work. I cannot come." He lets them know, why should I stop to come and meet with you? 4 times he sent this message, and 4 times he gives the same response. They attempt to intimidate, to create rumors, and to produce false accusations, all in attempt to throw Nehemiah off course. But Nehemiah continues the work, and he does it with even greater determination. And eventually, the wall is completed. In fact, the wall is completed in what is described as record time, 52 days. So here's the reality of the risk point. There will always be a risk point when moving from an interest to an enhancement. Because why? You will attract both resistance and results. Nothing you're pursuing to do and to do with all of your might will go without being challenged. The decision, however, will be yours, and whether you stay committed to the work that you're called to do, or will you allow other people's interest to redirect your focus? Scripture tells us in Ecclesiastes 9:10, "Whatever you are capable of doing, do it with all your might, because there's no work, thought, knowledge, or wisdom in the grave," where we are all headed. Simply put, this is the time to do your work. Because when you're dead and buried, there won't be the opportunity to do it. So why allow your time to get inundated with passive curiosity rather than allowing it to be managed and enhanced by something you value? This is the season to blow up the interest echo chamber. This is the season for you to put an end to everything that's attempting to hijack your commitment, to move from passive engagement so that you now move to directed engagement, so that it becomes an enhancement. Because when an interest becomes an enhancement, there's a ripple effect. And that ripple effect not only impacts you, but it impacts many other people who experience the results of your commitment. Just like in that account with Nehemiah. His lone interest in rebuilding a wall became a community project that rallied other people who were interested in seeing the same thing happen and who committed time and resources to a project that they finished in record time because they directed their focus and engagement and made the outcome an enhancement for years to come. So here's what you need to do. My challenge for you today is to be aware of the culture trap of curiosity. Be aware of the culture trap of curiosity and its attempt to extend your energy in directions where it was never meant to go. If your curiosity is not aggressively directed and redirected, it will keep you at the passive level. So to fight against that, to put some muscle in action, in opposition to that resistance, this is what I'm going to invite you to do. One, I want you to identify an area of interest that is a priority for someone else, but is out of step with the direction that you know you need to be headed. Second, I want you to develop a response you will give that person or that group, one that is respectfully acknowledging their interests, but clearly communicates that it misaligns with where you're committing to invest your time, your energy, and your tangible resources. And then third, quite frankly, I want you to be prepared to articulate that response with clarity and conviction so that your stance is understood by everybody who is attempting to insert an expectation or an interest that is out of step with where you should be putting yours. Then I want you to take the time to direct your energies towards the specific action and get the result. Invest your time, your energy, and your tangible resources in that interest that you're choosing to elevate to an enhancement, and don't look back. Don't allow other people's words, intimidation, perspective to be a distraction. And as you do that, that means you're going to accept the reality that you will face the resistance, but that the resistance will not have the final word over what you're willing to execute. And you will experience results. Here's my final word of caution for you. You will not be able to pre-plan your response to resistance. You won't have a pre-planned response for every moment of resistance. But if you do have clarity about what your central messaging is that you'll need to leverage to stay on target in any communication that's sent your way, that's trying to get you to spend time on people, projects, and in places that don't align with where you need to go to make an enhancement, that will be good enough. In fact, spending time focusing on how you will respond to resistance can actually hijack time and energy and resources that could be invested in working towards making something an enhancement. So don't over obsess about the anticipation of resistance. Just know that it will come and be prepared with your central message that you use. Keep it simple and use it each and every time. and you keep it moving. Keep it simply expect the resistance, simply expect the reality of that resistance, and proceed anyway. The greatest response to resistance in any situation, the greatest response to resistance to making progress in any area is your single minded focus and your invested interest, your invested energies in directed engagement in that area that you're committed to make an enhancement. I want you to reflect on what I shared with you in the episode in managing the risk of other people's interests. And if you need something tactile or visual to help you think through the steps, you can leverage the interest risk management resource, which is linked on my website, takecareandlive.com. All right. Until then, I look forward to you having a wonderful experience as you move that area of interest to an enhancement. And I want you to do what I encourage people to do each and every day, and that is to take care and live.